There's a lot of times in the book where I talk about how you can have these open-ended conversations where you're asking questions and then you're not immediately coming in with a thought. You're then coming in with another question, because the whole point is to let her know that what goes on in her mind is interesting and you want to hear about it. And then she thinks to herself, I want to know what's going on in my mind.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Cara.
Vanessa, it's really wonderful to have journalists on the podcast. I mean, I love scientists, researchers, clinicians. I love having teenagers and young adults. But there's something about the journalist lens that is really refreshing and different. Their training leads them to report on a topic in a way that's different from researching it. And so what you're about to hear in this episode with Kate Rope, who is an award-winning journalist, and she's really a storyteller on a mission. She's worked in the New York Times and the Washington Post and Time and more. Kate has published a book called Strong as a Girl and uses her journalistic lens to examine a topic that we've come at a few different times on this podcast from a few different perspectives, but I don't think we've come at it from this particular one.
Right. I mean, the book is about how do we raise empowered girls, and not a simple question, but a question that Cara and I have engaged with over and over decades in our own careers in different ways. And from Kate's perspective, she uses not just interviews with experts like us, but she also had focus groups with teen girls, and she interviews parents, right? She does the sort of rigorous reporting that journalists do. And so it gives us a whole variety of insights. And it also points to how complex this question is. And we get into really complicated topics like how the hell do we deal with clothing choices and the Sephora tween phenomenon? How do we deal with the big emotions of teen girls without shaming them out of them? So we know, because we hear from you all when we meet you and you email us about the big questions you're grappling with your tween and teen daughters. And this episode hits all the hot topics. Hi, Kate. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you two. You are some of my heroes, so I feel privileged to be here chatting with you.
Oh, please keep going. So we're going to cover, you've written this really wonderful book, Strong as a Girl, which we had the privilege of being interviewed for, I guess about a year and a half ago. Is that right?
That sounds right.
Time is elastic. Right. And Cara doesn't even know what year it is. So we're all doing great.
That's right.
And it's
not only that, but Cara reviewed the puberty section, and she gets you both get shout outs in the acknowledgements, but she gets one within shout out
right here because it didn't require a ton of review. It was really good.
I had good sources.
Right. It's great when the source is also the one reviewing the content.
It's probably like this. If I was at the New York Times, they might question that.
They might question it, but luckily you also have editors for this really, really wonderful book. We're in an interesting moment in our society, and this book is about raising strong, empowered girls, which is near and dear to my heart as having founded Dynamo Girl. All about empowering girls. Cara has influenced literally millions and millions of girls in this country through her books, the Care and Keeping of You series for American Girl. And Kate, you are taking us a step further with really, really useful, evidence-based guidance and insights for raising strong girls. But we kind of have to start with the tricky topic of what baggage and challenges and issues we as the adults are carrying into that work of raising strong girls, because we don't come at this pure as the driven snow. We come at it with decades of our own stuff. So can you start there? What do you notice? What do you see about the adults, maybe particularly women, maybe particularly not, when they go into this effort and dedication of raising strong girls?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, with so much commitment and earnestness, and with a lot of pressure too, right? There's a lot of pressure on parents, but we know it's mostly moms, to get it right. And yet we are a product of the cultural narrative that hasn't really changed much since we came up. The messengers are different, but the message is the same. And so I have so much grace, and I address it a lot in the book, for the ways in which we are challenged in just being strong for ourselves, just learning ourselves how to undo the messages or break through the messages or acknowledge them and just understand they're going to be there and we're still going to do our best. So I feel like one of the opportunities with that is that you get to work on it for yourself too. I have a section on self-compassion because we don't teach girls to be kind to themselves. We teach them to be kind to others at every turn. So in order to raise a girl who's kind to herself, you have to practice it too. And you can be imperfect and you can make mistakes. And I'm not trying to add to your to-do list, but honestly, that is liberating. If you start to see that if I do this for myself, it bears fruit with my daughter, but also I deserve it and it bears fruit with me. And also recognizing there may be topics for which your particular history or life experiences make them really, really tough, if not impossible, to tackle with your daughter in a way that feels comfortable for you, effective for her, and that there's always outsourcing and there's always ways to bring in other people to support in the areas where you've been hurt so much that it's still a big mountain to climb for you.
So what does it look like to do that? Let's go back to self-compassion for a second and use that example. Let's say you're a person who has not been super generous with yourself in that way, and your kids have seen
I don't know
that.
what you're talking about.
I have no idea. But let's just say Marcia had a friend. So let's say that's your history, and your kids have watched that for years. What does it look like to begin to grant yourself that so that you can begin that modeling, or at least put that baggage aside?
I mean, with anything you've been doing that your kids are picking up on that you feel like it's not good for you, it's not good for them, you can just be honest. You can just be like, hey, if you happen to read my book, which I would encourage, you can be like, I'm reading this book about self-compassion and realizing how hard I am on myself all the time. And I want to stop that for me. And I also want to model for you greater kindness. And it's not going to be easy, but I'm going to start doing it. And this is what it's going to look like for me. And you can even enlist them. There's nothing more powerful. And I talk about this in the book, in empowering a kid, and in this case, a girl, to change you. So you can even say, hey, if you notice me saying like stupid or whatever your go-to phrase is when you've screwed up.
Mine is a lot more explicit than that.
Right. Whatever it might be, shucky darns, you rascal, if you see me doing that, you could say, hey, mom, that's not very nice. I wouldn't let somebody talk to you like that. Why are you talking to yourself like that? So you can bring them in.
Self-compassion jar instead of the swear jar.
Yes.
That actually might work in our house. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting. Kate, I don't know if you've read Melinda Wenner Moyer's most recent book.
But I haven't read all of it, but I've read a good chunk of it.
We won't tell her that you haven't read all of it.
I have a lot of books on my nightstand.
But she writes a lot about self-compassion as like a massive part of raising kids who aren't jerks. And it's so funny how some of these concepts feel so like woo-woo and sort of like fluffy, but in fact, there's like tons of data and underlying research about how and why they're so valuable. So, okay, so we're gonna be a little kinder to ourselves. We're gonna give ourselves some compassion. We're gonna give ourselves some grace. And then there's fear.
Yeah.
So a lot of and I'd love for you to get into some of the messaging. You talked about the messaging we received as girls and women and the messaging that girls and women today are still receiving. I'd love for you to talk about the messaging a bit, and then how fear plays into sort of the calculus in managing it and reacting to this messaging
as a parent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to back up on the self-compassion piece, it's not just be nicer to yourself. They're like really specific steps you can take,
Right.
and you can make them as non-woo as you want. It's hard to take action when you actually don't have the steps. So the steps to self-compassion are literally like, wow, I'm feeling like crud. I'm mad at myself, recognizing whatever the struggle is. I am not the only person to have forgotten my mother's birthday.
Mm-hmm.
People forget their mother's birthdays all the time. And rather than beat myself up, I deserve a little compassion. I'm going to say to myself, okay, Kate, it's okay. What would feel good? Do you want to get a cup of tea? Whatever your go-to, do you want to walk around the block? Just a little kindness. You don't have to meditate. You don't have to, speak in a soft voice. That does really help, actually, because we're trained, we're evolutionarily trained to, touch, and soft voices are good for us. But you can do it really simply. And it's those 3 steps. And then to answer the question about fear, that runs across so much of the book. And we've just really been raised on fear. We've been raised on worst case scenarios. We've been raised on a totally false idea that we are responsible and can actually control the person our kids become. And we can't. Our kids are completely separate beings, and we are one influence in a sea of many. So all of that, and then we're just told all the time, what can go wrong? What can go wrong? And that's part of why I wanted to write a book that starts in the early years, because we can talk about the smaller things. I mean, not that there aren't kids who face serious issues in the younger years and families, but in general, most of the issues that come up in the younger years are much more tackleable, or feel like you can tackle them more easily than like, is my daughter's boyfriend okay? Is her girlfriend treating her well? Are they having sex? Whatever the concerns are. Is she doing drugs? All the things you hear about. So starting young allows you to practice on the way less fearful stuff. And then the other thing I would say is that if you can drop the fear as much as possible, and actually in a moment where you're feeling afraid, I am worried because she's walking home from school by herself for the first time. What if she? What if this? What if that? Instead, say, I really hope she enjoys the walk home. I hope she feels proud of herself for doing it. And I hope she hears some bird song or notices something about the neighborhood she didn't before. Then you're putting yourself in the mindset of imagining a positive experience for her, instead of imagining something that is statistically extremely unlikely and nothing you can control.
As you were writing, I'm wondering which one of these 2 things contributed more, in your opinion, to the fear factor. Was it all the stuff that parents are hearing today about all of the things that can go south? Or was it the stuff that they experienced in their own childhood that terrified them?
Yes. Yes.
Fair answer. Very fair answer.
Think that we were brought up, we are, well, I don't know how old everybody is, so I'm not going to assume, but there is this historical sort of fear-mongering. I'm 52.
55. Winner, chicken dinner.
You win. There's this historical story that got started in the late 80s about stranger danger, which actually was not scientific. It was not statistically what was happening. But it led to this fear that anytime your children are outside of your purview, they are like at significant risk. And so there's that level of it. Then there's all the conversations today about social media and self-harm and depression and anxiety and suicide and all these things that kids are experiencing, which are true. But again, if we approach them from fear, there's a lot of hopeful ways to approach those topics. So there's just messaging from anywhere you turn. And then there's like something more personal. Like I grew up in a large body and I was bullied, and I'm really nervous that's going to happen to my kids. So when I see that her body is bigger than her peers, it's making me nervous, and that's making me react from a place of fear because I just don't want that for her. There's a lot of roots of fear. And so it's not an easy solution, but there are different ways to get at all those different kinds of fears to to bring them down. One of which being really good anxiety medication, which is one of the ways I manage it. You don't have to just rationalize your way out of it, but there are a lot of ways to think about it differently when you're presented with the facts.
Right. And we live in a clickbait world where fear gets more clicks than hope and positivity. Cara and I feel like we're constantly pushing against the forces of clickbait culture, just staying positive and optimistic. And we love having you right alongside us, Kate. So let's go to a place of loveliness and positivity and optimism, which is taking your daughter to the zoo. And what you noticed when you took her to the zoo, and she was so into the gorillas, and what that taught you about like guiding girls and, kids of all genders through these years.
Yeah. So I think it was my older daughter was around 4, and we went to the zoo, and I think the ape house was the first place we went. And she was just immediately fascinated, just, these human-like beings that were interacting with her and interacting with other kids. And she could have sat there all day. But I was like, impatient adult who felt like but she has to see everything at the zoo, in particular, my favorite animal, the sea lions.
I do love the sea lions.
I'm a marine bio girl myself. Yep. So I dragged her away. She didn't want to go. I dragged her away. She got on board. She went with me to the sea lions. She went with me to a couple other places, but she was never as engaged for the rest of the day, and very quickly was ready to go home. And I just realized that I had completely just superimposed my agenda on her experience. But the whole purpose of going to the zoo was for her. I can go to the zoo by myself, and I had many years of going to the zoo and getting to watch my favorite animals. So this was her trip. And it just made me realize that I needed to pay more attention to what lights her up in a situation. Where's her interest gravitating to? And also, it's so powerful, and this is a big point I make in the book a lot, to let your kid, your girl, set the agenda. Because girls are raised to be people pleasers, because they're raised to consider the emotions of others well before their own, anything you can do to reinforce the fact that her interest in the gorillas is like totally valid. They're fascinating. I'm just going to sit here with you and let you experience them and share them with me. I'm going to allow myself to see what happens when I spend that much time. I bet they do something totally different if you're spending an hour with them versus 5 minutes. So it's really about letting your girl's interests be a driver in your home. Not that you can't introduce them to things you love, but recognizing when they're really getting excited by something and letting them say, I really like this and I'm going to stay and do it. And, imagine what that does inside her brain. One, my mom respects that this is really important to me. And, two, I've got good instinct that these beings are interesting, and I can just sit with them and have my own experience. So I did much better the next time I took her. I did the ape house until she was done. And then the next house is the reptile house. We got there and she was like, let's go have lunch.
And it feels like there's a number 3 that you could add to that list, which sounds like, hey, my mom is respecting my opinions and feelings and modeling that for me. So maybe I might do the same for her. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, people are interested in my interests, and there's a lot of times in the book where I talk about how you can have these open-ended conversations where you're asking questions and then you're not immediately coming in with a thought. You're then coming in with another question, because the whole point is to let her know that what goes on in her mind is interesting and you want to hear about it. And then she thinks to herself, I want to know what's going on in my mind, And so it's both confidence in engaging with other people, that you can be true to yourself, and understanding yourself.
Kate, what happens when those interests are not the ape house, but they're Sephora or crop tops and booty shorts, or, insert sort of like cultural phenomenon that those of us who grew up in our generation sort of raised to be feminists and to push back against some of this stuff are struggling with. I mean, it's really one of the most common questions we get from parents of girls is like, I don't know how to handle the obsession with like makeup or the way she wants to dress. And yet we do want our kids to feel like they have volition, they have agency to choose. So how do we walk that line?
Well, my first question is, do you guys have a good answer?
So I have an answer. Cara has an answer. Is it a perfect answer? No, but I'm happy to share.
Okay, I'll share mine.
Yes.
And just to say that I think this is a really hard needle to thread. I do not micromanage what my kids wear. I did a little bit with my first daughter, and she was just like, I'm fighting the patriarchy. Like the dress code is a patriarchal construct that is primarily afflicted upon girls, and in particular girls of color. And so, I mean, she knows exactly how to play me, right? I'm like, oh, that's a good point. You do it. With my second daughter, she does it, and she's also very sensitive to people criticizing or addressing her, how she's presenting herself. So even to come at it with a, hey, like your belly's showing, is for her to internalize criticism about how she looks, or just to internalize. So for her, I let it go. I let it go. If the school wants to make a stink about it, then we'll talk about it. I have a harder time with the products. I mean, this is the marketers. This is capitalism. This is not our kids' fault. So engaging with them in a conversation about why do you want to wear the makeup, or what do you like about the products? Or, sometimes I think to myself, these companies are really kind of playing on this story we've bought that our appearance is the number one thing. So I'm just planting the seeds. I'm not saying you can't get the products. I'm not saying you can't use them. I won't pay for them. I'm not saying you can't use them, but I want to have a conversation about why you are. And I want, in all things, I want my girls to be critical thinkers. And so I'm just planting a seed. They may, like my daughter be like, I'm fighting the patriarchy. Or they may be like, yeah, okay, mom, you write about all this stuff, whatever. I want my, Moroccan hut tree scrub from Target, but the seed is planted. It will show back up again. I don't have to solve this problem right now. I don't have to say you cannot have those products. I don't have to say have all the products you want. I talk about the larger cultural phenomenon in a way that's appropriate to whatever age they are, but mostly this is happening in the tween years. And so they are totally ready for that conversation. And then, why is it important to you? And, how does it make you feel? And I do talk about the male gaze. I talk about that a lot in relation to social media and how girls present themselves. And when I watch social media with my older daughter who has access to it, she's now in college, I talk about the male gaze and how, like, look at how everybody is always doing the lips, or how everybody's always doing the hip out. Like there's this narrative that has been presented about how you should look. Everyone's following it. So my younger daughter is not on social media. She actually she's in 8th grade. She got her first phone, but I won't allow her on social media until she's 16 because of the documented harms of social media and body image and increase in eating disorders and other negative outcomes like depression and anxiety.
Vanessa, I'm curious what your answer is to the question of how do you, just to circle back, it's sort of how do you thread that needle of the zeitgeist moment thing, whatever that thing is, when it clashes up against what feels okay or right or safe to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because for those of us who are really conscious of not wanting to shame and not wanting to sort of blame our girls for what is actually the result of like very powerful societal forces and billions of dollars of marketing, it sometimes feels like we're not allowed to say anything or set any limits. And, Kate, you referred to that. It's like, how do you do it? But I do believe we have permission to at least, if not just hold up a mirror, like, hey, here's what I'm noticing, and like how you're dressing or how you're spending your allowance or the money you earned your job this summer. I'm wondering, like, why is that the priority for you? Why does that feel important to you? So I think there is a bit of holding up a mirror and getting them to reflect and think about. I also think it's our right as parents to set some boundaries and to have some limits. Kate, you mentioned like kind of making different choices for different kids in your house at different stages of their development and different stages of your parenting. And I think we learn more as we go. I mean, for me, my kids don't have a dress code, but there are times when I say, you know what, for what we're going to, I don't think that's an appropriate clothing choice. I'm going to ask you to choose clothing. And I do that I have boys and girls in my house. I do that for all of them, depending on what the situation is. And it's almost easier with the makeup products and the skincare products because some of them like really are not safe for kids' skin. And so
that's a whole nother conversation.
Right. Like there is some, I mean, luckily I've got Cara around who I can just point to, but there is stuff
under the bus.
Yeah.
You can throw me under the bus with your kids anytime.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pediatricians, teachers, the other parent. I mean,
totally.
We love it.
But
We're
there
here
is
for
stuff that they really should not be using. It is literally unsafe to their physical being. So that sometimes I think is easier than some of the sort of dress coding type stuff. And as Cara likes to say, actually about substances, but I think it works here. It's not never, it's just not now. Right. So like that outfit is adorable, but it's really for an older kid. And right now, let's choose an outfit that's for a kid your age, for example.
I mean, let's be honest. Kate, what your oldest daughter did in that argument that you used as the example, right? That hits on every nerve we all have because what we're so worried about, whether it's provocative clothing or makeup or whatever, goes back to this sexualization narrative, right? And that taps into the fear piece. And right, these things are all connected. And so threading the needle is really hard because when you ask yourself at your core, why am I reacting this way? The answer is because I'm terrified that it's messaging the world that I want you to see me as a sexual object or as someone who's older than they are. I mean, trust me, I love using the excuse of all the endocrine disrupting chemicals that are in all of the makeup products, but that's my excuse. What's underneath it is that, when my daughter was 12 and on YouTube doing makeup tutorials, I was freaking out. And I regret that. I'm here to say I regret that because she can do makeup 100 times better than I can. And I wish I had been more open. I wish I had been that mom who's like, move over. I'm going to sit down and learn with you. It was like, there's learning and then there's putting yourself out in the world in risky situations. And there's a whole big swath of stuff that happens in between. So this to me is why it's so confusing. And, Vanessa, to your point about setting limits for all kids, boys, girls, I do too, but the appropriateness lever for boys is different than for girls. Often it's sloppiness versus sluttiness, right?
That's fair.
And so,
although sometimes my boys will be like, I feel like they'll be wearing like gym shorts and they'll be like, I think my DICK, obviously they don't spell it out, but for those who have younger people listening, is pretty exposed in these shorts. I'm going to put on some other shorts. You won't hear necessarily a girl having that sort of calculus for why she's going to change out of a particular outfit. It becomes like an external.
I would say, Kate, I'm very interested in where you go with this, because I would say if you can get into conversation with girls about it, they are well aware of what sits underneath your worry. But it is their job at 12 and 14 and 16 to push back against the rules, especially when the rules have no rationale attached to them, and just say, I'm going to wear whatever I want. And it is totally reasonable to say a dress code that says girls cannot wear short skirts and tank tops, but boys can wear anything, feels like we're not having the real conversation here. So, Kate, I'm wondering where where you go on this and sort of how do these conversations evolve? How did it evolve as you researched and wrote this book? Did your opinions change?
Yeah. So I think, I just heard two words that to me are part of this dialogue: slutty and provocative, right? And both of those put this back on the girl. And a girl is not responsible for the way any other gender responds to her,
That's
and
right.
so I am very careful. I feel very strongly that there are effective things you can do to protect your child from risk of sexual abuse and assault. There are really concrete steps you can take. I have them in the book. Telling my daughter to wear a different outfit isn't going to protect her from assault.
No,
A person is going to go who they're going to go for. So I feel that those conversations very quickly get into the victim blaming that happens when a college student is assaulted and what was she wearing? So I lean toward talking to them about what's comfortable for them. How do they feel in it? I respect if there are school rules. If the school rules feel really biased, then I'm going to push against those school rules. And I'm also okay for them to have those consequences, right? Like with my older daughter, I worried like she's going to get dress coded or whatever. And then it's like, so she gets dress coded. My younger daughter did get dress coded and it was ridiculous. And we processed that together, but that's a consequence. She made a choice to wear something. Something happened. Was it right? Was it fair? No. But then she had to negotiate like how she felt about it and what she wanted to say to that teacher or the administration. So appropriateness is different. I've got an aunt for whom I would not let my children show up in an outfit that was anything they want to wear, right? Like Brandy Melville is not going to my aunt's house for Christmas. But that's a respect for like her space and how, she's old fashioned.
100%.
But for me, I really, really try to back off any sort of scrutiny of how my girls look or present themselves. I talk about it. I talk about where is it coming from? Is it coming from them? I talk about the bigger issues. But I am not going to be one more person whose gaze judges her based on how she presents herself to the world. So I also have in the book, and this is a little less, like my kids were never picture day ready. Like I never once told them to wear a certain thing. I never told them to comb their hair. If they wanted to, like if they said, Mom, can you help me have a braid? Can you help me have this? I would do it. But I wasn't going to be, everybody else is going to send the message that their appearance is the most important thing in the world. And I'm not going to be a messenger.
Kate, so I'll show you the pictures of my kids on picture day and you can see just how much. I mean, mostly I just never remembered that it was picture day. So it was like after the fact and they were in like a stained t-shirt and like ripped sweatpants. And I was like, oh, okay. Terrific.
So just to summarize, so that there's no confusion for our listeners here, I think we're all saying a version of the same thing. I don't think there's anyone on this podcast who disagrees with the fundamental point that victim blaming is anywhere near okay. What I think we're all highlighting is how this is hard. It is hard to thread this needle. It is hard to have these conversations. And the beautiful thing about what we're talking about is that we can get into conversation with the kids in our lives about the baggage we carry, about the fears we have, about the importance of self-expression, about the importance of not blaming a victim. We can bring up all of these really hard, big topics over many years in the context of things like clothing choice and makeup. And it's going to look and sound different in everyone's house. But I just want to do a little like clarifier in case we're not being crystal clear.
And I think it just demonstrates it's hard to have a female body in our culture. It is hard. It is hard for us to navigate it in our female bodies, for our daughters in their bodies. And just to the point of, I'll just come straight out with my fear. I've had my daughter walk downstairs and in an outfit that just really hackles, right? And I've said something, and I've said a stupid thing. It didn't come out right. It was weird. And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "I'm feeling really nervous about what you're wearing because of all these other stories in my head about your safety, about how hard it is to have a body in a female body in this culture, and is not coming out right, and I'm sorry, and just let that comment drop. I just want you to know that like I'm working through this stuff too. So I think like always there's an opportunity to say you don't have the answer. You're thinking about it, and to engage them in the conversation so that they can help come to an answer for themselves that feels good.
I think that's so important, Kate. We're all going to say things that we regret, particularly when it comes to our kids' like appearance, and owning it, naming where it comes from, and sort of like moving on from that, I think is really, really critical. I want to think about another place where we say shitty things to our daughters.
Yay! Self-compassion, everyone. Remember self-compassion?
Yeah. Is around their emotionality. Right? I mean, the world, we, ourselves, their friends, everybody's busy telling girls that their big feelings are too much, that they need to calm down and stop being so dramatic, and, you know, a litany of many, many other phrases that make girls feel like their emotions and the expression of those emotions is not okay. And before we get into your kind of ideas for how we can manage this as parents and caregivers of girls, Cara, will you just give like a little primer on the role of estrogen in the body, particularly during puberty and adolescence?
Yeah, well, I think your real question is the role of estrogen in the brain.
Yes, particularly about moods, not about like breasts or periods, but the role of estrogen in moods.
Yeah, so estrogen and testosterone, the sex hormones that are in charge of puberty, both circulate in and around the brain. And what we know is that they are rising quickly and falling quickly over a matter of hours, all day, every day. So it's on like 8, 10, 12-hour cycles that estrogen goes high, high, and low, low in your body and also around your brain. And when estrogen is bathing the neurons, it does change the way they fire. It changes the way you feel emotionally, which is why we see our child behave one way in response to a scenario or a sentence that comes out of our mouth on one day. And the next day, you can have the exact same set of circumstances, use the exact same words, and the reaction is totally different. It has to do with, are you catching them at an estrogen high as estrogen is plummeting, at an estrogen low? Estrogen typically makes girls wear their emotions on their sleeve. Not always, not for every girl, but typically the shifts make those emotions, they amplify those emotions. So you get this perfect storm, right?
So Kate, knowing that, right? Like knowing they don't totally...
Which I didn't know until I interviewed Cara, and I like a light bulb went off about what was happening with my older daughter at 10 and a half.
Right. Right.
It feels so much better to know.
It's much better to know. And that since puberty is happening earlier, the mood swings that we might have seen in ourselves or our friends at, 13 or 14 might be showing up at 9 or 10 these days. So what's your guidance for sort of not demonizing emotionality, right? Partially because we can't totally help it. Those of us in perimenopause and menopause can attest to that. But also because being an emotional human being, there's nothing wrong with that. And yet girls also have to learn how to regulate and modulate depending on the situation and kind of like what they want to have happen as an outcome. So like, what's your guidance? What's your guidance there?
Yeah. I mean, I think, so one of the biggest things I heard, so I had focus groups with girls all over the country for this book. And one of the biggest things I heard was how they felt they were not allowed to express certain kinds of emotions, namely anger, also sadness or concern about things that people thought, oh, you're too young to be concerned about that. And so we know that emo diversity, the ability to experience and express all your emotions, is key to mental health. And also that anytime someone is in, whatever it is, if it's because of the estrogen or if it's because of something that happened on the playground, whatever it is that's causing an outburst, that's a fight or flight response. And to try and tamp it down in that moment is not only maybe not the best approach, it's ineffective because they're not operating from their rational brain, they're operating from their emotional center. So I think always validating emotions, even the hard ones. Like your kid yells at you, I hate you at 10 and a half, hypothetically speaking, that never happened to me. Wow. I hear you are so angry. I hear it. I get it. And maybe even allowing that to be for a minute, and then later, hey, you know what? I can take it. I know you don't really hate me. I can take the hit. But in general, in our family, we don't hurt people when we're really upset, but we're allowed to be really upset and we're allowed to be angry and we're allowed to express it. And we understand sometimes we're not going to do it right in that moment because we're just so activated, So I think really I encourage giving a lot of time to move through that moment in the safety of your own home, right? Like I'm a safe person. You can scream all those things. And then when they begin to calm down, and staying with them, unless you're so triggered that you need to get a little break, in which case I have said to my kids, I hear how angry you are. I'm having a hard time staying calm as I hear your anger toward me. I'm going to take 3 minutes in my bedroom to calm down and then I'm going to come back. But, I hear you. Just letting them know you validate the emotion. And then if the emotion is coming with mistreatment of siblings, mistreatment of people in the classroom that you're hearing about or whatever, anger isn't an excuse to mistreat people.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we help you experience those moments in a way that, you're able to feel them because you have every right to feel them and you're able to move through them. And then you're able to say things. I mean, if you're angry, chances are that kid did something crappy. So you should say something. You're just not going to say your most effective thing right in the moment. So let's how do we go back to that moment with a little more understanding of the situation, say what we feel, say what we mean, but do it in a way that's going to be more effective for both of you, both getting that person to change the behavior and for you to feel better about the interaction.
I mean, there's a reason why Vanessa and I quote Eliza Pressman pretty much every single week when we're speaking, when we're on podcasts. She has this wonderful line that all feelings are welcome and all behaviors are not. And that is really where you're going with this. I think it's hard sometimes for people to bridge being the quote safe place for your kid and the receptacle of anger there. But then how do they then sort of shift gears when acting out in that way is not going to work socially? So here is where my advice would be to talk to someone who knows, sort of mental health, mental wellness, helps with behavioral approaches to these things. If you're listening to this and you feel like I'm in over my head and this strategy is not working in my house because my kid cannot sort of gear shift, and it won't work for everyone, then reach out to someone who can help you figure out what strategy works for you, because it's going to be different in different places. But it brings up a secondary piece, which I connect to. I don't know if you guys will make this connection to physical pain. And I'm thinking about sort of pushing through pain and things like period pain. And I'm thinking if they're entitled to the feelings that they have, which I think we will all agree everyone's entitled to their feelings, we think of that as emotional feelings. But here they have, with periods, for instance, many of them new physical feelings that they've never experienced and that hurt. I mean, periods, cramps can hurt, right? You can feel very emotionally untethered. And the world tells us, oh, for that, grin and bear it and get through. So I would love your thoughts on sort of all of the mixed messages that are coming at our kids, especially our girls, when we are sometimes telling them, here, dump on me, it's all okay. And then sometimes we are telling them, but don't let this stop you.
Yeah. I mean, well, the first thing I would say just about getting, outside support is, and I do have this very clearly in the book, here are strategies for managing outbursts, and here are strategies for managing outbursts when they are aimed at you. But here are signs that you need some support.
That's right.
If family life has become untenable, if you're hearing that the classroom disruption is making it hard for the teacher to teach, then that's a sign that your daughter needs additional support to learn emotional regulation skills. And if she's neurodivergent, some of what I'm talking about may not work. Logical consequences
right.
don't work always for a girl who's neurodivergent. So in those cases, it's like so skillful to say, I can't handle this. I'm trying. I read the book. They told me to do the thing and it's not working. So then, reaching out to the school counselor, to an OT, to your pediatrician, to a mental health professional that, other friends have worked with. So that is always an option to you. And you are not ever expected to just parent, grin and bear it, right? Like when it's not good for you. It's not good for them. It's not good for the rest of the family. And then the pain thing, I actually think that's sort of an example of how we could treat emotions, which is that okay, cramps suck. At your size and weight, you can take an Advil. You are not expected to suffer in silence. And you don't want to miss lacrosse practice or whatever. So let's figure out what we can do to get you there. And framing, when one of the things that I talked about was, periods empirically, objectively are wacky. You're going to have once a month, you're going to have uncontrolled bleeding out of your vagina. It's probably going to hurt a lot. Your moods are going to be really bad. And they're just and why? They're 10, 11, 12. Do they want to have a baby someday? Who knows? But letting them know, this is a sign your body is healthy and it has some really crappy inconveniences, but also you don't have to suffer at that level. Also, there are really effective solutions for many of them. And the same goes for your mental health and your anger issues or your, emotions. Right. You are not expected, if you are having trouble, keeping anger in check on the playground with your teachers, with your family, you're not expected to take care of that alone. There are professional solutions that we know about that we can put in place.
Kate, I want to close with this sort of line that's very hard for parents to walk, which is wanting to be connected to our girls, sometimes when we're concerned, but other times not, just when we want to be loving and caring. And yet it's kind of easy to veer into friend territory and lose the boundaries of being the adult. How do we do what you call, I love this phrase, the low-key check-in, right? How are we...
Which I got from Katie Hurley.
Credit Katie Hurley for the low-key check-in. I love that phrase so much. How do we sort of have the chill vibe that our girls will best respond to, right? Not high intensity, not interrogating, without sort of veering into hey, we're best friends. Let's tell me everything about your life. What's your guidance for that?
I mean, I think to the extent that you can project a friendly relationship, and that you can calm your fears to not overreact when they want to take you through all their fashion followers on Instagram, hypothetically speaking, and you think it's all bullshit. Excuse me. You think it's all bull crap, but I do make that effort. There's sitting back and connecting. How you doing? Hearing something and not responding in the moment. I think that's the key. You hear something that hits your spidey senses, but in the moment you don't overreact. You just take it in. Okay. And what does that mean? And what's that like? Okay. Maybe you overreact and then you're like, whoa, sorry, this is really triggering for me, but I want to calm down and I want to hear about it. And then if it is very concerning, you say, okay, now here I am. I'm your mom. My number one goal is your well-being and safety. And what you've told me is concerning and I want to address it, and you are always allowed to tell me anything, right? And you are allowed to call me from the party. And, that doesn't mean we won't ever have the conversation about what happened. But in that moment, I will keep you safe. And part of that is having the harder conversations and making sure that we are looking out for all the areas of your well-being. So that's how I play it. When I can, I am playful, I am open. When I hear things that are hard, I control my reaction, which is extremely hard because I do have pretty serious anxiety. Once again, medication helps me with that, as does daily exercise. But I work to keep it down. And then because I'm not going to be effective at addressing the situation if I'm triggered. So, and then when I've calmed down, and as long as I can wait, because maybe I'm like, oh, I got to talk about this right now. But like, if I can calm down for 5 minutes, if I can calm down for one day, whatever's allowable given the concern, then I come in with, I'm your mom. I want only the best for you. And I would be abdicating my responsibility as your parent if I didn't address this. I'm so glad you told me. I am not judging you. I just want to figure out how we keep you safe. That's how I do it.
Well, I think there's no better place to land. It is incredible speaking with you, Kate. It is a remarkable journey that you've taken through a journalistic lens. I think the world is very lucky to have access to the inner workings of your mind and your research. Thank you for writing Strong as a Girl. This is so wonderful. Thank you for coming and sharing all of your research and thoughts with us.
Well, thank you guys. As I said before, you are some of my heroes. So thank you for informing the book, and thank you for asking the hard questions, because those are the ones everyone wants answers to and they keep not getting. So I'm glad, we may not have perfectly answered them, but we gave some good stuff. So thank you for having me. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you for the work you do. Group hug.
And there are no perfect answers. That's
right.
The hard part. So come back and visit us, Kate. Thank you.
Life is messy.
Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.